So I was a little surprised at first of what I was hearing and realized, what's going on here? Out of this incredibly beautiful backyard, the places that I could have sat down in, I chose to sit down right in between two guys who were in the midst of a deep, conversation about adoption. And so it was at that moment that I realized God was doing something there. With my Coke in one hand and my barbecue in the other, my jaw almost dropped as I'm hearing these thoughts about adoption being tossed around and how intense these guys were and passionate about rescuing these kids. But as I talked with Eric with a K a little bit more after that conversation, I realized that his story was very similar to mine and how he initially resisted the thought of adoption as well. But how God had softened his heart and how he and his wife were now looking forward to bringing home their two kids. I went back to the hotel that night very excited, and I texted Jill at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night and telling her what had happened. And it's like, God's doing something here. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I just had this half hour, 45-minute conversation with these two guys about adoption. So that was kind of the beginning point. The second marker that God had brought into my life was later that summer. I was leading one of our mission trips with our mission organization, Leader Treks, down in Memphis, Tennessee. And this was our second trip that we'd done to Memphis, Tennessee. And on the way home, we spent the night at a church just to kind of do some debrief and some processing with the team. And the next morning, before we rolled out of town to come back here to Chicago, we, as we did every morning on our trip, was challenge our students to spend 45 minutes alone time with God in our devotional books. And our theme for that week was Dare to Disciple. And we were going through the cost of discipleship and what Christ has called us to do. And so as I remember sitting there on a picnic table in this church parking lot, our devotional that morning centered around Matthew 25. And these verses rose to the top for me. And it says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.'" And I read those verses, and I was considering kind of, as we taught our students how to study Scripture and understanding the principles that you can find and interpreting that passage, and then I get to the application part. And the question that I was posed with was, what should I do? As we were challenging our students to come up with very tangible, practical action steps of ways that they can incorporate the Scripture into their life, I was challenged with the same question in my own heart. And I realized that perhaps God was calling me in this passage to continue to consider the role of adoption as a way to care for those who have none, to care for those who were thirsty and didn't have a drink, to care for those who didn't have clothes and to clothe them, to care for those who were sick and to look after them. So my application, as I wrote in my journal that morning, was, is God asking me/us to live out the meaning of this passage through adopting a child? And so as I was wrestling with that question, my action step at that particular point was to come back home, continue to pray about this process of adoption in our family, but to deliberately speak with Jill and to talk with her, begin the process of exploring different agencies, and attend a couple informational meetings about adoption. Begin to open that door a little bit further to see if God would continue to confirm for us if this was the road that He wanted us to go down. A couple weeks after that was the 4th of July, and as we've done in the past, we love to go out to Iowa to see Jill's family, and to western Iowa particularly to see the rest of her family. And this was the case on this particular year. And being the 4th of July, we're all gathered up, and we're going to go into town and do the 4th of July parade and the fireworks and a little carnival and that sort of thing. Well, we were heading out of Jill's grandfather's house to get in the car, and her Uncle Randy, right back here at the table, unbeknownst to him, asked me a very innocent question. We've had great conversations in the past about church involvement and theology and other sort of issues, turns around on the way out to the car and he says, have you ever read this book called Adopted for Life? And I was like, I never heard of it. Well, there's a copy out on the table if you didn't see it on the way in. He says, we're reading this as a church leadership right now. And we're considering this idea of bringing about some support for those who are trying to adopt into Northwest Iowa. I'm like, very interesting. And I quickly tried to skirt the issue because this was very uncomfortable for me. And I'm like, let's just get in the car. We got to get to the parade. And, I was very much caught off guard by his question, just in the sense of God working in my heart to this point and softening it in this whole idea of adoption. And then to have Randy just really shoot an arrow to my heart about a book. And I blew him off, or tried my best. And but the book stuck in my mind. And I quickly came home and ordered it on Amazon. I had it delivered to our house, secretly without him knowing, and started reading it. But the interesting thing after that conversation by the car was after I tried to skirt the issue once, he brought it back. And he says, so Eric, it's kind of a personal question, but have you and Jill ever considered adopting? And do you remember that, Randy? I very much tried to really skirt that issue, being not in the position to respond or even want to give any indication that we were considering this. But it really did strike a chord with me, and I really feel like that was a third marker that God had used Randy to challenge me in this process of thinking through what role adoption has in our lives. So we came back home. As we continued to discuss, we began to pursue some different agencies and looking at some different opportunities. It became very clear to us that adoption was meant to be for us, and that God was calling us to do that specifically as a family. And so as we kind of narrowed down our agency and the country that we wanted to choose to adopt from, Korea kind of came to the top, and we began the process. And on October 1st of 2010, our application was sent to our agency and approved, and our journey to adoption began.
It's been an interesting process just to see, as even though we've never seen him in real life, just how God's placed such a love in our hearts for him, and just a desire to hold him, to bring him home, to play with him, laugh with him, help him when he's hurt or scared. And ultimately to teach him about Christ. And sorry, I didn't plan for that part. But I'm reminded how, on a very small earthly scale, how this is similar to what God has done for me and for you, on a level greater than any of us can understand. It's given me a different glimpse of God's incredible love for us and his desire for each person that he's created, to trust him and to rely on him, to love him and to respond to his incredible love for us. And so I'm beginning to understand in a different way our adoption into God's family, and the passages where God talks about how we're adopted have just become a lot more real to me, how we've been adopted through the sacrifice of Christ. And so it's just incredible and amazing to think that we are his sons and his daughters. So for now, I wait for Joshua to know us and trust us. And I pray for him and others who haven't yet opened their hearts to God's incredible love, that they might be adopted into his family.